Hello, you're watching TVP World Talks. I'm Jonasz Rewiński. The 15th of March is National Day in Hungary, celebrating the nation's rise to independence back in the 19th century. This year, however, the focus was firmly on the present and the future, with upcoming elections firmly in the spotlight. As incumbent Prime Minister Viktor Orbán and his opposition rival Péter Magyar faced off with massive political rallies, we look at what impact this Sunday could make when Hungarians finally head to the polls next month. Joining us here today is Daniel Hegedüs, Deputy Director at the Institute for European Politics in Berlin. Hello and welcome to TVP World.
Good morning and thank you for having me.
So I've mentioned this Sunday, but this is not the end. I mean, today there are going to be more rallies and protests. So do you think it's fair to say that the political discourse in Hungary is reaching the boiling point now?
Yes, the Hungarian politics is in an extraordinary heat, and the yesterday rallies objectively haven't changed that in any direction. That was a competition in mobilization on the part of both big parties, the incumbent Fidesz and the newly emerging Respect and Freedom TISA opposition party. And both of them succeeded actually in gathering around 150,000 participants. So you can see, of course, a war of numbers in the Hungarian media, obviously government-controlled media favoring the narrative of Fidesz, that actually their rally was the bigger and actually the biggest rally in the democratic history of Hungary. But both parties succeeded with their main goals, demonstrating that they have a very significant and wide popular support in the Hungarian society, and they try to build on that demonstration of power and support in attract further potentially still undecided voters in the peak of the election campaign.
It's fascinating to see that even the statistics differ so much, as you've mentioned. I mean, the media connected to Prime Minister Viktor Orbán claimed that they had 180,000 supporters going out to the streets versus 150,000 for the opposition. The opposition told Politico the numbers for them was more like 350,000. So this is actually difficult to verify, at least for now. But coming back to the elections themselves. Now, the supporters of Viktor Orbán clearly went out to the streets with some rather radical slogans there. And the government was promoting some fairly combative narratives, including on Ukraine. Do you think that this is the way in which Orbán really hopes to claw back some of his lost support right now?
One was able to see unprecedented escalation, unfortunately, in the bilateral relationship between Ukraine and Hungary over the past 2 weeks. And this shift in the focus on the campaign and the public narrative in Hungary is unfortunately favoring the governing party, because their almost only campaign message is that there is a collusion between President Zelensky, Ukraine, European institutions and the Hungarian opposition, and the main purpose of this collusion is to secure Hungarian financial contribution and potentially also military contribution for the fight of Ukraine.
Are people buying this narrative, though? I mean, some of it was quite heavy-handed. They used an AI-generated video suggesting Hungarians would be sent to the front line. Has there ever been any indication that any country would need to contribute troops, even if they didn't want to?
I think we should not forget that since 2014, all election campaigns of Fidesz has been built around an external concept of enemy, fear-mongering, and mobilization against an immediate external threat. And we see actually the same logic working in this campaign as well. So yesterday, the main messages at the campaign rally of Fidesz were, we are not allowing that Ukraine and the European Union is making Hungary a colony. Obviously, from an external and rational perspective, all of these claims appear to be completely ridiculous. I fully agree, but you don't need to, or you cannot forget that 80% of the Hungarian media landscape is under government control, and in a large extent, certain segments of the Hungarian society are only consuming these messages. So for them, obviously it's just a constant reinforcement of the same message, and one cannot wonder if some parts of the Hungarian society really believe that this threat allegedly posed by Ukraine and the European Union can be real. Obviously, these are not allowing Fidesz to win new supporters, but this fear-mongering and fear-based narrative can be completely sufficient to mobilize the core electorate of the party. And we see that even through this core electorate, the election remains competitive. In most of the independent polls, TISA has a lead between 9% and somewhere lower double-digit percentage points. But we know that the Hungarian electoral system, and particularly the electoral map, is favoring Fidesz. So against that background, the election remains competitive, and the main lesson learned for the Hungarian government is that for them it makes sense to double down on this fear-mongering narrative.
Now, before we go back to Ukraine and President Zelensky, I want to ask you a question, because you've mentioned that the electoral system itself, is it really slanted towards Fidesz in a very meaningful way, i.e. Suggesting that perhaps some irregularities could happen, or at least the structure of the system could result in the ultimate election outcomes being distorted?
Yes, I think we need to differentiate here. The electoral map is gerrymandered and is really favoring Fidesz under almost any circumstances. And therefore, an opposition party requires 3, 4, 5 percentage points more in electoral support in votes in order to be able to gather a majority of mandates in the parliament. The electoral system itself, in its logic, with its first past the post system, is favoring the relatively largest party, meaning that from the moment when TISA is becoming the relatively largest party, the system itself can favor TISA, and this is the reason why we can actually rationally hope that TISA can have a solid government mandate potentially in the next parliament. Whether Prime Minister Orbán will revert to authoritarian measure and potentially artificial irregularities to alter or change the election output, we will see. I think this is a plausible scenario. I wouldn't say that it's the most likely electoral scenario, but it's a plausible scenario with which international partners of Hungary need to reckon with.
So let's talk about the TISA party. They are actually going into these elections on a more domestic agenda. So they are actually talking more about the problems Hungarians face every day versus foreign policy. But I will also ask you a question, or I'd like to ask you a question concerning how Ukraine allegedly, or admittedly, became a bit of a hot potato in the political discourse in Hungary following President Zelensky's comments, which caused Peter Magyar to also say, we don't want to have anything to do with these narratives. And that specifically is about President Zelensky saying that whoever wants to block the funds from the European Union, our military men will make a phone call and talk to him in their own language. That wasn't very well received in Hungary, right?
Yes, I think those words of President Zelensky that could be interpreted in a way that he threatened Prime Minister Orbán and his family in person were, I would say, rather unfortunate. We could find explanation for this loss of control, but unfortunately, it clearly helped actually the political opponent of President Zelensky in Hungary, which is the current Hungarian government. And it made it a necessity also for the Hungarian opposition to criticize that approach in that language that was not a standalone. We have also seen that the European Commission officially declared that that sort of communication with EU member states is simply unacceptable from an international partner, independently how important and how strategic the relationship of that partner with the European Union is. But as you mentioned, TISA focused in its campaign narrative on domestic issues. Strategic corruption, lack of economic growth, the very desolate state of public services in Hungary, public transportation, education, healthcare. And in order to be able to maximize their votes, the campaign narrative should remain focused on those areas. And if the foreign impulses are shifting that focus of the campaign to Ukraine or international challenges, that is unfortunately hampering the chance of Fearmongering and TISA to be able to get a government majority in the next Hungarian.
Speaking of foreign impulses, one quick question. How is Hungary likely to respond to President Donald Trump's appeal for NATO support for the operations in and around Iran?
I think it's a potentially informed guess that in the Hungarian government-related media, this request would not even emerge, because obviously it would put a bad light on the relationship between Prime Minister Orbán and President Trump, who even today is framed as actually a politician of peace in the Hungarian media, and actually the main guarantee that a peace can be also achieved in the war between Russia and Ukraine. So obviously what's happening in Iran, the attack against the country itself, and now the request of President Trump for more NATO involvement, it would contradict to the main logic of the government communication. And therefore, because it's a politically controlled and politically influenced media environment, I think they would largely remain silent about this issue.
Daniel Hegedüs was our guest today here on TVP World. Thank you very much for joining us and for sharing your insight.
Always a pleasure. Thank you for having me.
And I'm Jonasz Rewiński. You're watching TVP World. Please do stay with us.